doing a series called The Wonder and Mystery of Prayer in recent months, and there's one more coming next week about prayer as spiritual warfare. But I figured talking about prayer as spiritual warfare doesn't make any sense if you don't dictate what spiritual warfare is. So I guess today is sort of the transition between two sermon series in a roundabout way. We're going to be doing a series called Unseen over the next month or so, and I guess my thinking for today is just to make a point more so that there is a spiritual battle going on in our world today that often goes unseen, but it is very, very much alive and well. And that probably this is an example I borrowed from somebody else, so I can't claim credit for it. But I reckon the best example I've ever seen of this is the Lord of the Rings movie, or the movie series. There's a nice, very safe, predictable, lovely place called the Shire. And I'm sure this is. I think was it filmed in New Zealand somewhere? There's these harmless little people, and they walk around and they tend to their gardens, and they just they raise their families, and everything's so lovely and nice, and it's all nice and peaceful and everything else, and their world exists about as far as they can see. Everything that they can see is the world. Everything that they can touch and taste and see and smell, like that's as big as the world is. They think, okay? And yet, just beyond the boundaries of the Shire, and even if they're honest, within their own lives, even, there is a much bigger battle underway. And that battle, my friends, is for the domination of hearts and minds, and I guess the people's very existence. There is a much greater fight going on, far bigger than just that person's breakfast or their garden. There's actually a much bigger battle. I think it involves like a mystical ring that was lost and then rediscovered, and they've got. And I think Frodo and Sam have to figure out a way to basically adopt this mission, to take this ring to essentially walk it back to some volcanic mountain somewhere and drop it in. They have to kill that. That's the only way you can find lasting peace in this place. Along this mission, there's going to be ups and downs. There's going to be failures. There's going to be people who try to get in the road. There's going to be moments of victory and moments of success and moments of failure and struggles. Now, like I guess the characters of the Lord of the Rings movie, we all sort of I think tend to understand there's probably things happening that are bigger than us in our world, that are outside of us, right? There's things that are happening online, and trends that are happening in political spheres and social spheres and all those other sort of places. And that, I guess, feeds into today's secular mindset a little bit, which is that the world exists about as far as what we can see, as far as what we can know, as far as what we think is going on. And that sort of tends to support this idea, just live your best life now. Here and now is all that matters. Your feelings are all that matters. You do you. Enjoy the moment sort of thinking. And yet the Bible sort of, I guess, makes it very clear that there is a real, unseen, spiritual battle beyond what we can see that is going on, and that rages for control of the people and the minds and the hearts of our world. And that battle not only rages out there somewhere, it rages in here as well. It's in all of us, right? I would suggest that it exists in all of us in areas like doubt, like anxiety, like I guess fear and worry about tomorrow. The everyday unanswered questions of life. It fundamentally opposes everything we're trying to build here as a church. I don't want to overstate that, but it is real. It's very, very real. If you'd like to come on staff for a week, I can show you. It is real. it works against our motivations to get our prayer room running. It works against our motivations to get to open our Bibles. It works against us in every area we see. And wrestling with this is hard because the reality is that regardless of what I say this morning, everyone knows there's going to be a last song, a prayer, a coffee, lunch, and then we go back to whatever this week is going to bring, right? So it doesn't matter what I say this morning because all of us have to go back to reality tomorrow. And yet, here's the point. I think Elisha is truly a man who understands that because this spiritual battle is real, he's got to live with a foot in both camps. He has to live like there is a war that I can't see, but I've got to live in the here and now. And I've got to figure out a way to do both, if you know what I mean. And I want to say this morning very, very clearly that we are at war whether we like it or not. I think Satan's greatest trick was to convince the world he didn't exist, wasn't it? In the Lord of the Rings movie, there is a scene where one of the kings who is trying to remain neutral and just trying to remain, he's just trying to sit on the fence and not really commit himself to anything. His response is, I will not risk open war. And one of the characters called Aragorn says to him, well, war is upon you whether you risk it or not. That's the reality. Now, while Satan has, I guess I would say, a measure of power and influence in our world, and he certainly has a pull, we know as Christians that through Jesus' death and burial and resurrection and his life, that eternal victory over sin and darkness is already accomplished. Right? Just a spoiler alert, the last page of the Bible is written. Jesus wins. Everyone okay? Okay? That's how the story's going to finish. Jesus wins, and there is a day coming where the reality of what Jesus has won and all of what he has won will be seen. But until he comes back and brings that with him, that battle today still rages. And the extent to which we understand that battle, I think on some level, influences our decisions in the here and now, which is why I want to talk about it. So, first, how do we live dominated in a world at spiritual war? I want to submit that, like Elisha, let's live with a foot in both camps, but be people who seek to drive our enemy nuts. Is that okay to say that? Notice you got the king of Aram fighting with God's people, and his generals and advisors are trying to do this and that are going to be like a step ahead of God's people. But every time he tries to do something, Elisha seems like a step further ahead. I guess the paraphrased version of verse 10 and 12 up on the screen there is that Elisha, empowered by God's Spirit, knows what the enemy is trying to do, and like he was physically listening to their instructions in someone's bedroom, he understands that there is a war going on, and he must be people who I guess are always thinking a couple of steps ahead. I believe in this spiritual war that we live in today, that we must be people who seek to be empowered by God's Spirit to understand what the enemy is trying to do, whether to us or whether to the people around us, or even to our society. And rather than advocate for a return to the easier days, and rather than advocate and complain about what's going on, and rather than just reduce everything to a political argument or have more members' meetings or whatever, how about we just get stuck into bringing more of the light of Jesus into our world? Now, look, in any conversation about spiritual warfare, I've got to, I guess, bring a little bit of balance to this. And here's what I want to say. We can easily get drawn to extremes in this conversation. Okay, one extreme would be minimize the spiritual to almost a personal feeling or whatever, because that's what the rest of our world does, right? Our spiritual feelings only amount about as much as we think it is, and it's no big deal. We just assume that the spiritual forces are they're just overrated scare tactics, trying to convince people, that Halloween and alternative spirituality and all the demonic stuff is a bit of harmless fun. That would be the mindset of our world. Doesn't hurt anyone. And today's secular myth, I think, in many respects, would encourage this. Just focus on the here and now. Just worry about the stuff you can control and be happy, seek pleasure, all that sort of stuff. Church can just get reduced to a social club, and we'll have a coffee and we'll sing a couple of songs, and it's also nice, Stop it. It's a war. It's a war. So one unhelpful extreme would be we minimise the spiritual at all costs. The other unhelpful extreme would be we over-spiritualise everything. For example, if it rains on your wedding day, did it rain on your wedding day, or is it proof that the spiritual war is ahead of you, and that there are forces opposed to your success? If you can't find a car park at Christmas time when you want to go shopping, is that proof that just the car parks are full, or that Satan's got it in for you? Right? You can either get stuck in some extremes at both ends. And what I like about Elisha is he's like I said, he's got to figure out how to live with a foot in both camps. He's got to figure out how to operate in both places. He has to live in the real world with real issues, with real people, but at the same time understand that there is a much deeper conflict that he's got to live in, and his response, much like Jesus, is to live with his eyes open. He lives with his eyes open, prayerfully opposing what the demonic is trying to do, and instead seeking to usher in what God is trying to do. That's got to be our. I would respectfully give to you, has to be our primary objective in this conversation. As a church, we're trying to bring in what God and his kingdom are trying to accomplish, not anything else. Now, the second invitation is to not be given to fear. I think we've already talked about fear a couple of times this morning, Dave. You've got a picture here in verse 14 where the king of Aram sends chariots and horses to surround the city. The servant wakes up in the morning. He goes outside. There's troops and horses everywhere. What's going to be the natural, I guess, thought? I think it's actually in that last sentence. Oh, sir, what do we do now? Right? The very natural response when surrounded by what appears to be insurmountable odds, and what appears to be this enemy that is so big, and I reckon probably just to get paralysed by fear. Just to get paralysed by the size of the art. Look at the size of the army. Look at the size of the warfare. Look at the size of all their resources, and go, oh no, I can't fix this. It's bigger than me. Oh no. When the invitation from God is, don't be afraid. Why? Because there's more on our side than there are on theirs. It is a reminder for us that in the moments where the obstacles seem largest and the solutions are few and far between, that God is at work, my friends. And that in a world at war, he specialises in bringing hope. Let me just mention two little side issues here. Number one would be that you rarely get days off in a spiritual war. There's a realisation in the Lord of the Rings, isn't there? Once you get handed this ring and that ring's got to go somewhere, there's a job for you to do. Once, in a sense, you get invited into that battle, there is not too much in the way of days off. The battle's on, whether you like it or not. It is so easy, I reckon, in our world today, just to get lost or just want to escape. Because there's so much going on, and I don't know where my place is. And I guess the reality of the battle becomes, and when the reality of the battle around us becomes obvious, we've got to have a place to go to. We have to have a place to go to come back and, in a sense, be refreshed and drink from. It's that picture of the well. You've got to go back to the well to get some water to stay refreshed in order to stay in the battle. Otherwise, you're going to dehydrate yourself and be no good to anybody. You've got to have a place to come back to that makes sense, where you can refresh your soul before you go and fight again. Otherwise it'll get too much. The second thing I just want to cover in very briefly here is the best way you fight is together. The best way we fight is together. When Elisha's servant looks outside and sees everything, he goes, "Oh no, it's all bad." What he can see on a human level is just naturally overcoming and discouraging. Okay? But when the two of them together stand there, open their eyes and begin to pray, when Frodo and Sam figure out a way to start walking together on mission, they are unknowingly improving their fighting position. Okay? Now, please hear me. I don't want to get religious about this, and I'm not going to get religious about it. I'm just not sure that today's model of church attendance, healthy, you just come once every 3 or 4 weeks, and you come to a service, is a good thing when we're at war. Just follow me here, all right? I'm deeply concerned on some weird loving level that when we're in a war, we need each other a lot more than that. Does that make sense? I'm not sure that church is a service we attend far more than it is an army we come to fight with. We turn up and worship together and sing together about a king who has already won the day. That's stepping into the fight, I guess is my point. And that is why I think a week of prayer recently, where we stood together and pressed in together, was so powerful and was so essential moving forward. Because if you're trying to improve your fighting position, you've got to do that together. There is no other alternative. When people start praying together and they start calling God's kingdom to earth, not only does your fighting position improve, but it's probably our most effective answer to the things going on in our world. And just to be clear, that week of prayer wasn't the end of anything, it was just the beginning of something. Everyone okay? My last thought this morning probably is just this. Open your eyes to the true position that we hold. All right? I said this before, but in Christ we are victorious. Let me say it again. In Christ we are victorious. And if we open our eyes to this. And if we open our eyes, there are far more fighting for us than there are fighting against us. Right? I love verse 17. Elisha prays. Oh, yeah, there it is again. Elisha prays. Notice that? Anyway. "O Lord, open his eyes and let him see." The Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and when he looked up, he saw the hillside around Elisha filled with chariots of fire, horses. If you can't see, everything appears bleak because I'm surrounded by a massive army here and now. And I'm stuck in a place of cynicism and disillusionment until you realise that there is a heavenly army with twice as many of you fighting with you. Can you imagine, I guess, the encouragement that would be to somebody who feels like they're overwhelmed? And while God might sometimes, I guess, grant some people, I think, a level of spiritual insight to be able to see spiritual things like that are happening and to encourage and spur them on and probably to keep fighting the battle. I'm not sure, honestly, that we need too many spiritual insights or remarkable things when we as God's people can simply open our eyes to the situations that are happening in our world and start seeing them not as things to be whatever about, but actually see them as invitations to enter the fight. Many years ago up in Biloela, which is a community of about 6,000 or 7,000, so Wangaratta is a little bit bigger than that. We had a spate of incidents involving young people. We had a couple of fatal car accidents, 17, 16-year-olds, a couple of suicides, and in a small town that really shakes the place. There was a growing sense of hopelessness. There were some Christians in different places in the high school and elsewhere that were a little bit concerned about some of the things that were going on, and there was some developments, I guess, in a social sense. I'm not going to get into the details because people can watch this again. But there was some stuff going on that quite frankly made us concerned. And the most simple explanation, and the most simple explanation offered by the local community who didn't know Jesus were that these were all tragic accidents and really terrible and unrelated. But a group of Christians who were known to go for a walk on occasion and laugh and pray and talk and everything else, we all had different roles in the community. There were police involved, there were other people involved. We all had kids who were growing up in that community. We all knew teachers at the high school. We all knew that there was stuff going on. There was a sense of hopelessness starting to creep into the community, quite frankly. And we just decided as a bunch of Christians that there was a line that had been crossed and it was going to get uncrossed in a hurry. And one night we quietly went for a walk, a bunch of us. We stood in front of the high school and we interceded against the forces of darkness. There were no crazy weather things. There's no lightning came from the sky, no green clouds, no other weird sort of things started happening. As a cop, crime didn't really change. It just sort of kept going a little bit. But over the next couple of years, there were no deaths and no suicides, and there were a lot of positive changes made in that school and in that community. Now you can say, and you'd be welcome to say so if you to my face if you like. You can be cynical about that and believe that prayer made no difference at all. Here's my point. I tend to believe that our prayers have far more influence than we know, because there are at least twice as many on our side as there are on theirs. Right? And it is high time for the Church of Jesus Christ to simply understand the battle that we're in a war, and that we've got to improve our fighting position. In today's reading, Elisha's prayer brings blindness to the Aramean army. So that's it's actually the forces of darkness that are blind. Everyone get that? It's actually the forces of darkness that are blind and confused, and it's actually God's people who appear to be surrounded who are winning. Does that just change somebody's perspective for a moment? I believe that there is simply there is a very broad invitation right in front of us as the church to open our eyes to the battle that is raging, and rather than whinge about it, to respond believing that our prayers have a lot more power than we think. In the Great Commission, Jesus assures us, I have been given all authority. Let me just read that again. I have been given all authority in heaven and on earth. In other words, I have in my death and in my burial and in my resurrection defeated it all. Jesus wins. And while we might live in a world that is at war, and while it might concern us and it might frighten us sometimes, and while we might lose sleep over it sometimes as well, we do not need to be fearful, because Jesus has conquered death and hell and hopelessness and sin. And he brings life and freedom and redemption and new life, and his Spirit pours out his love into our lives. And there are far more on our side than there are on theirs. If only we would open our eyes to the fact that we're in a war. As our world continues to invent ways to celebrate darkness, I think it simply falls on God's people to recognise it and to step into it and to pray that more of God's light comes. That is our opportunity. You can take confidence today that even though we are at war, Jesus has already won. We'll never walk a moment, a step, where he has not already conquered it all. We are not, my friends, fighting for victory. We're fighting from a place of victory. Let me just say that again as we finish. We're not fighting for victory. We're standing together today in a place of victory already. I'm going to invite Alan to come and pray for us.